Today, we become legends.
Support is quite possibly the worst understood role in all of Smite. If you're one of those guys who asked to swap because they got support, hopefully by the end of this video you'll be the one begging to play the role, not begging to trade it away. Because support can be insanely fun once you know what you're doing. But before we jump in, if you watch my channel frequently but are part of the almost 70% of people who aren't subscribed yet, why not join up? It only takes a second and YouTube will laser beam more of my videos into your brain to help you get better at Smite. Okay, enough of that. So as with all my guides, I'll be splitting this one up into several distinct sections with themes that I think are key to learning support. If you already know the very basics of the role, you can probably skip past the first one or two sections using the timestamps down below. Section 1, the introduction to support. This will give you the very basics like where the support plays and what they're supposed to do in general. Section 2, Gods. This will detail all the viable God picks for support and what you should learn to play the role. Section 3, Items and Builds. If you're having trouble finding the right build for your supports and feel like it's holding you back, this is where you want to be. Section 4, 2v2 Laning. Here I'll cover everything about the early laning phase with the ADC and what to do. Section 5, Roaming and Rotations, a very important aspect of support that comes after the 2v2 laning phase early on. This section will cover how, when and where to rotate to make the most effective impact on your games. And finally, Section 6, Teamfighting as a support. This is pretty self-explanatory. Here I'll cover what to do as a support in late game 5v5 teamfights, as well as your role in objective play and base sieging. Alright, so with the contents laid out, feel free to skip around to exactly what you need. Like I said before, if you're already familiar with Conquest basics, you can likely skip the first section and maybe the second one as well. Okay, so for those who didn't skip further in, let's cover the basics of the support role first. The support role in Smite is focused mostly on assisting teammates and locking down enemies through high crowd control and disruption, while also being tanky to stay alive in fights. Support plays pretty heavily around grouping up with the team and making big impact plays. Some supports like Khepri or Geb will focus more on protecting key targets on their own team with buffs and shields, while other supports will focus more on diving key targets on the enemy team with their CC, allowing their own team to push forward and secure the kills. So if either of these two playstyles seem appealing to you, support might just be your role. Every role in Smite has its gods. Support is a role that doesn't have too much variance compared to some others, but there are some picks beyond the usual Guardians that can work. On that note, Guardians are the primary class that sees play in support. Pretty much every Guardian can work in support, some will work better than others based on the meta and other factors, but for the most part, all Guardians will work decently well. The only one that doesn't really have too much success is Kabrakan, but even then, he's seen some play in the past, so I won't count him out completely. The second most common class you'll find in support are warriors. Not all warriors will work like Guardians do, but a good few can. Amaterasu, Erlang Shen, Guan Yu, Hercules, Horus, Mulan, and Odin are the most common warriors right now for support, and while not all of these are viable all the time, these are the ones that see the most competitive play in the support role. Assassins are actually the next most common class, believe it or not. Assassins in support tend to be flavour of the month style picks if you want aggression from the role. They're less reliable and not always good, but sometimes they are. Fenrir, Nejar, and Serket are the three assassins that see consistent play in the role. They're more focused on heavy CC and can work well with tanky builds. And finally we have mages. These are far less common and only really a handful of mages see consistent play in support, mostly being either heavy CC mages or healers. Baron Samdi, Hel, and Nox are the usual suspects for support mages. Some people will claim Aphrodite and Changa work there too, but they're very inconsistent and usually don't work well as supports. Unsurprisingly, hunters see no consistent play in support at all, they're just not built for the role. So with gods covered, let's move on to how you build those gods. For this section, I'm going to be focusing on Guardian builds since the vast majority of supports that see play are in the Guardian class. However, a lot of support items are neutral in that they can be built across any class of gods, so much of this information will translate across from Guardians to other viable warriors, assassins, and mages as well. So in terms of starting builds for Guardians, the usual Guardian's Blessing is the way to go. This gives you extra sustain, health, and protections, but most importantly, this gives you a 3 extra gold on minion assists and 4 gold per 5 seconds once you stack it up. This is essential since support tends to get less gold and farm than other roles and they need this extra gold from the blessing to keep up. After your blessing, you will usually see a tier 1 item, Hand of the Gods, and potions. The Hand of the Gods is to be used on the purple buff at the start of the match before you head to lane. The tier 1 item you get is most often shoes or glowing emerald to rush into boots or gauntlet of thieves respectively. You then spend any remaining gold on health potions. Since Guardian's Blessing gives enough mana sustain for you early on, you're better off with health potions. You can get 4 potions with the boots start and 2 with the emerald start. After starting builds, boots should be your first item regardless of what you started with. You need this mobility for your rotations, and the stats are very efficient on boots early on. On Guardians, you have a lot of options for boots. You can pretty much go with anything. Traveler's Shoes and Reinforced Greaves are the most common options. Traveler's Shoes giving you more mobility, Reinforced Shoes giving you a bit more defense and CCR, but the other 2 boots options in Shoes of Focus and Shoes of the Magi are very good if you want a little bit more early damage in your build. Typically these are less common than Travelers and Reinforced, but overall you can pretty much go with any boots on a lot of supports and feel pretty good about it. Though especially if you're new to the role, I recommend Travelers or Reinforced since it's quite risky to go for the damage boots early on. Your first item after boots in the vast majority of games right now will be Gauntlet of Thebes. This item is slow to get online and you're pretty squishy until you stack it up, so be aware of that, but once you do get it stacked, it's the single most gold efficient defense item in the entire game, which also gives protections to your teammates around you, which is perfect for supports. This just gives an absolute ton of stats, which is really important for supports for the cheap cost because you don't get a lot of gold as support, so you need to be very efficient with the gold that you do spend. So after your Blessing, Boots and Thieves, your build can diverge into whatever items you need for the current match. Counterbuilding and choosing the correct defense for the situation is important in support, so here's a list of items I pick from to finish off the build. So aside from Thebes that I just mentioned, Sovereignty is a super strong item against most teams that are the typical 3 physical comps. Heart Ward is reverse sovereignty. Less useful since on most team comps they only have a magical mid laner, but if they have a magical elsewhere like a magical mid plus a magical jungle or magical ADC, then it can definitely be worth a pickup. Spirit Robe and Mantle of Discord are both valid pickups for mixed defense with useful anti-CC passives. On a similar note, Hide of the Urchin is sometimes seen on supports, but for the most part, Spirit Robe or Mantle will serve you better since they don't require stats and give CDR, which is important for supports. Given that most of their good items don't come with CDR. It's a hard stat to get your hands on as support without building subpar items, so having that 10% from Spirit Robe and or Mantle is really good. Magi's Cloak is a very niche pickup that I usually wouldn't recommend, but if you're getting blown up by hard CC, then this can be a good way to prevent that. In most games it's not necessary though because you're quite tanky as a support and usually don't get focused down too quickly. Relic Dagger sees a good bit of play to reduce your all-important relic cooldowns. Supports pick up very impactful teamfight relics like Shell, Sprint, Horrific Emblem, and also by Blink for initiation sometimes, so reducing the cooldown on these very impactful relics is super nice. If you need more magical defense, Oni Hunter's Garb is great since you're often around multiple enemies as a support and get good use from the passive mitigations per nearby enemy of the Oni's passive. And if the enemy has significant healing, Pestilence or Contagion can be a nice pickup. Just watch for your solo laner buying either Pestilence or Contagion since the auras of these 2 items don't stack. If your solo already has one of these, you should probably skip it for something else. With the crit meta we're in right now, I have to mention Spectral Armor for physical defense. This is an anti-crit item, which you should only really get when crit hunters or some junglers like Mercury or Nemesis that are building crit can give you trouble, but in that situation, it's really amazing. And finally, if your team has heavy auto-attack synergy like a double hunter comp, hunter and ADC mage, or a hunter and an auto-attack jungler, Shogun's Kisari can be a nice boost to your teammates' attack speed. It's not good in every situation, but in those that I mentioned, it can be really useful. As for relics on support, your main choices are Heavenly Wings, Shell, Horrific Emblem, Belt of Frenzy, and Blink. Any combination of these 2 relics to fit your playstyle, god, and situation should be good. Alright, so with items covered, let's finish off this section with a build example for every viable support. Here's a build for Ares, Artio, Athena, Bacchus, Cabrakan, Cerberus, Fafnir, Ganesha, Geb, Jormungandr, Kepri, Kumbhakarna, Kuzumbo, Sobek, Sylvanas, Terra, Xingqian, Yamoja, Ymir, Amaterasu, Erlangshen, Guan Yu, Hercules, Horus, Odin, Neja, Fenrir, Serket, Baron Samedi, Hel, and finally Nox. These builds are generic and I highly recommend swapping in different items based on the situation, but if you're new to the role, these builds will do you fine until you learn the ropes and figure out which items you should be swapping in at which times. Okay, so with gods and builds covered, let's move into the meat of what to actually do throughout the game as a support, starting off with the 2v2 laning phase. So the 2v2 learning phase in duo lasts from the start of the game until supports rotate out to help other areas of the map. There's no exact time when you as the support should begin your rotations, it's more something you get a feel for with experience and it changes every game. The 2v2 learning phase is all about synergy and working with your ADC. I see a lot of supports as well as ADC players that think they can just ignore their lane partner and do their own thing and it'll all work out. That's a bad mindset to have when you're laning in the 2v2. In my experience, you need to find a balance between your two playstyles and try to meet somewhere in the middle. If you're a very aggressive player but you notice that your ADC is playing quite passive, maybe drop back a bit and play a bit more defensive instead of going for the kill on the enemy all the time and blaming your ADC for not following up. Just like playstyles, gods can impact this as well. If you're on a fairly passive support like Geb but your ADC is an Ula that loves to fight early on, maybe try to look for more opportunities to be aggressive since your ADC is on an aggressive early game god and is likely to look to take those fights, so be ready for that. For the 2v2, you want to focus mostly on clearing waves early on. This does two things. It allows you to make aggressive plays once the wave is cleared because you won't take minion damage by attacking the enemy duo lane, but this also gets you level 2 and potentially other breakpoint levels faster than your enemies. The standard duo lane start is to do purple, then go to the lane as the waves meet. You'll clear the first wave but still both be level 1, but whoever has the pressure and clears that wave 1 faster and pushes the enemy can hit their wave before they can hit yours. After 1 or 2 minions of the second wave, you'll hit level 2, and if you manage to level up before the enemy can and they're still level 1, you have a huge advantage in the lane, which can lead to early kills or just snowballing the lane because the enemy has to play safe and not fight you. So make sure early on to be prioritizing the wave, and a side note, you want to avoid last hitting the wave at all times. This is so you can stack up your blessing, but also so that your ADC gets that extra gold from last hitting, which adds up over the course of several waves to a decent lead. Between waves in the 2v2, you want to either pressure the enemy looking for poke or kills to force them to tower, or invade their camps if you're winning lane and out-clearing them. If you're on the back foot and are getting out-cleared or poked yourself, just do the opposite. Play safe and drop to tower if you need to, as well as avoiding getting poked out at all costs. If the enemy pushes super far up to try and poke you, then hopefully you can get a jungle gank or something to punish them. Sometimes if you're on the back foot, you have to let your purple buff or alpha harpy go, which is fine. It's sometimes alright to let some farm go instead of dying trying to defend it. However, if the enemy does go for a purple invade, make sure to call it out. If your jungler and or mid laner are on the duo side of the map near red buff or something, they can come and help you out and shut down the enemy duo for playing too aggressive. I've seen a lot of duo lanes give up their lead by doing really aggressive purple buff invades and then getting rotated on by the mid jungle, so it's definitely possible to shut them down this way. Likewise, if you're the one winning lane and going for these invades yourself, watch your wards and check where the enemy mid and jungle are at, plus listen to calls. Sometimes you might have to back off a purple invade if your mid calls a rotation to duo from the enemy jungle and or mid laner. Also, just a quick bonus tip for the 2v2 before moving on. A lot of the damage in the early 2v2 laning phase comes from the enemy ADC's basic attacks. You can easily avoid these if you're low or just don't want to take poke by hiding in your own minion wave. This also applies to your own ADC. If the enemy is hiding in the wave, try to CC them or pull them out of the wave so that your ADC can land basics on them. Also, this works in reverse. If you want to get a lane clear speed advantage, you can block the enemy ADC's basic attacks, taking damage yourself but keeping your wave healthy so you can get the push advantage. Alright, so after you leave lane, the 2v2 laning phase ends and the rotation and roaming phase of support begins. This is arguably more important than the 2v2 laning phase. You can have a bad lane early on and maybe get a bit behind, but if you out-rotate the enemy support and make a bigger impact during this phase, you can quickly turn the game around. It's a different skill set entirely, which is why support can be a difficult role to get to grips with. You basically have to change up your playstyle halfway through the game and learn a completely different way to play. It's very difficult to explain how and when to rotate because it's dependent on many different factors and changes every game. Your god, your team's gods, the enemy team's gods, the time of the match, what the enemy support is doing, if you're ahead or behind, all of these things factor into how and where to rotate once you're done with the laning phase. In general, you'll want to roam around mid lane and look for skirmish fights with your mid and jungle. The solo lane and ADC generally will stay put and won't rotate much early on, so you're mostly looking to either fight around mid lane or potentially look for objectives as the game goes longer. Or you're looking to roam to the side lanes to gank with your mid and or jungle to get them a lead. A big thing I see support players struggle with once they start rotating is keeping up in farm. Once you're out of the duo lane and don't have a specific lane to cover, I see a lot of people just mill around not really paying attention to their farm, but it's critical to keep up in farm or you can't do your job as a support, and a good team will focus you down and burst you in every fight since you're so underleveled. Most of your farm as support comes from leeching, so don't be afraid to do it, it's not shameful. You mostly leech mid waves and jungle camps. Once again, the side lanes tend to do their own thing and need their farm to get a lead, but as you roam with your mid and jungler, make sure you're in assist range for minion waves and camps to keep up in your farm while looking for good fights or objectives. A basic way of describing rotations is just be where you're needed most. If you stick to this rule and try to think about why you should be where you are, you'll improve at it very quickly. It's a hard skill to teach in a video format like this, it really comes with experience, but if you just check yourself every 10 seconds or so and ask why you are where you are and what you're achieving by being here, you can correct yourself if you're being inefficient or rotating when it's not needed. It could be that you're here for farm, or you think a fight is about to erupt so you're sticking around for that, or you saw the enemy jungler roaming near duo lane so you're just kind of milling over there in case a gank happens to help out your ADC. Just think about why you're rotating to certain places and correct yourself if you're doing something for no reason. Alright, so with laning and rotations covered, let's move on to teamfighting as a support, which is equally as important if not more, as it's one of the hardest jobs to do in Smite. How to teamfight as a support depends on many of the same factors as rotations. Some support gods play better as aggressive backline divers, but most play more defensive, helping your backline carries. If you can keep them alive, they can get their damage off from a safe distance, and you can stop the enemy backline divers like the jungler and the solo laner from getting to them. That's how you win teamfights. A big thing you need to know as support in teamfights is that your abilities are extremely valuable, so don't waste them. Without your abilities, you're effectively useless. All you can do at that point is body block and basic attack people for 20 damage apiece. It's also the case that supports tend to have access to less cooldown reduction than other roles since they need items like Sov and Thebes that have no CDR, so make sure to save your cooldowns and don't just blow them at the start of the fight for no reason. I know it might be tempting to Geb to the enemy frontliner who's getting in your face, but you might be better off saving that for when the enemy rat ults your mage so you can knock him up and give your team some time to blow him up. This is especially important for any abilities that you have that can peel effectively, which basically means saving your teammates from dives. Most support gods will have at least 2 of these abilities in their base kit, maybe even 3, and some even have an ultimate that can peel as well, but know your god and don't waste your important peel abilities so you have them ready for when the enemy inevitably dives your carries. As support, I tend to spread my attention, but also have a preferred target in mind when teamfighting. You want to be helping the people that need it most or that you think you can save or benefit the most. Sometimes your ADC is dead no matter if you Geb shield them or don't, but if you're paying attention, you might see that your mid laner is also getting dived and you can save them, so you should just focus your attention there and let your ADC go. This isn't to encourage letting people die, but sometimes it can be better to cut your losses and keep a key teammate alive rather than wasting cooldowns peeling someone who's a dead man walking. Also, it may sound harsh, but if there's a massive disparity and you can clearly see that one of your carries is way better than the other, it might be worth focusing primarily on them and less so on your other carry or carries. If you want your teammates to like you, this might not be the best idea, but if you want to win, then it's often better to target your peel at the carry that can win you the game and not the 0-8 Anubis that's walking into all 5 enemies trying to get a pentakill. In terms of objective play, support is often the one to tank the objective and take the brunt of the damage. The solo and jungle usually zone to create space, keep enemies away, and look for picks on out of position enemies trying to defend the objective or steal. And your ADC and mid will be the damage dealers of course to burn the objective, so that leaves you as the support to be the one to tank it. Sometimes the solo will tank the objective however, in which case you're free to zone or do something else, peel for your carries if they're getting dived, anything like that. And a quick note in terms of objectives, CCing their mage is a priority over anyone else, both if they're stealing your objective or you're trying to steal theirs. The mage on each team is the secure almost always, so if they can't use their big burst damage to secure the objective, you have a chance to steal, and likewise the enemy can't steal from you if their mage is CC'd, or at least it's a lot harder for them to do so. As for base sieging, it's a similar situation. Either you or the solo laner can be first in to tank the structure, but it's usually the solo laner since they can dive more effectively and are more tanky than you for the most part. But try to make sure you're the second one in straight after the solo, since if the solo drops out of range it'll leash to the second person in, which needs to be you so that your carries don't take excess damage from the tower or phoenix. Much like standard teamfights, you also need to be aware of a counter initiation onto your carries when you're sieging from the enemy solo or jungle and be ready to peel for them. If you want to take a structure, it's important to create space for your carries and allow them to actually hit the Phoenix instead of needing to hit the enemy gods. But that's pretty much it for my support guide for Season 7. This one has been a long time in the making and tons of you requested support to be covered next, so here you are. If you appreciate the effort, then be sure to subscribe for more content just like this 3 times a week on my channel, and I'll catch you guys later. Peace.